he's going through a growth spurt, and so he's been awake with me like all morning. He's finally asleep. Anyways, hey, what's up, you guys? This is Haley here from Should You Buy It, and so today we're going to be talking about my delivery and how my delivery went. So I was actually supposed to be induced when I was a day after my due date, which was October 13th, and we were like, oh, in 5 years he'll have a Friday the 13th birthday in October. We're like, hells yeah, we're gonna go all out, and that ended up working out. But that's okay. Now he shares a birthday with Usher, I think. It was either Usher or Nelly. I can't remember. Anyways, so I was supposed to be induced on that day, and of course, I didn't know how they did inductions exactly. I thought you kind of made an appointment, and you went in, and you got induced, but that's not really how it works. So you have a set time and date-ish, and an hour before you're supposed to be there, you call labor delivery, and you say, I'm supposed to be induced today at, I called it 6 a.m. I was supposed to be induced at 7. Do you guys have any beds? And the first time I called, they said no. So I'm like, oh, fuck. They said, there's a couple things we can do. We can induce you tonight, or we can induce you in the morning, the next morning. He says, if we induce you tonight, your OB probably will not deliver you, which was the reason I was at that hospital anyways. So I'm like, I'll just wait till tomorrow. They said, okay, so we start the process again. You call us again at 6 o'clock, and we tell you if you have any beds or not, and etc. So how my hospital does it is they do not set induction dates on Sundays. They set the induction on Saturdays, and then they use Sunday as essentially like a rollover day, to where the people they couldn't get on Saturday, they do on Sunday. So I called Sunday morning at 6 o'clock, and I say, we got your bed, we got a bed for you, come on in. So I'm like, oh God, I'm like scared shitless. I'm like, this is really happening. So of course that's 6 a.m. So I have to essentially get the little things packed together that I use every day. Like, I had to put my contacts in, I had to get, my phone charger ready, I had to get all of that, and we got all that ready, and we ended up leaving the house and going to my hospital. So my check-in time was 7, so of course you sit in the waiting room for a tiny bit. They go and get your nurse and everything, and because how ours work are 7 to 7, how our hospitals here work is 7 to 7. So we ended up doing that, and then we got all the paperwork done. I had to change a bunch of stuff in the system, from my maiden name, insurance change, all that jazz. And then we started Pitocin at 8 o'clock on the dot. Right after they started the Pitocin, they measured me and they asked me, how far along were you at your last appointment? And I said, well, my last appointment was like Tuesday, and I was at a 4-ish. And she's like, she knows the doctor who delivered me, and so she's like, oh, well, those male doctors, they're usually pretty generous with that, so let me check you. She checks me, and I end up being at a 5, which out of 5 is you are in active labor, which I had felt like I'd been in active labor the 2 days before then, because I had been in so much pain, but there was no contractions, my water hadn't broken, I wasn't leaking, I was just in so much pain. Which that's why I kind of decided to get induced then, instead of waiting another 2 weeks for the other hospital, because it would have been insane. Anyways, so she's like, you're at a 5. So I'm like, okay. She's like, that means we can break your water at any time. Do you want your water broken? And I said, yes. I said, you're going to have to. She's like, because it feels like it could break at any time, but, since it hasn't broken, we're like, So I said, yes. So she's like, okay, let me call your OB and let me see what he wants to do. If he wants you to wait until he can come break it, or if the hospital specialist can break it, which is another fancy word, I think, for like the OB on call. So I'm like, I said, it doesn't matter to me. If the specialist needs to do it, that's fine. So she calls my OB. She gets back and she says, the specialist, he's not going to be here and he wants to break it now. The specialist is going to do it. Is that okay? And I said, yes, that's fine. And the specialist came in, very nice lady. And they end up using a little hook to kind of like make a tiny little hole, and then they're hoping that the pressure kind of, the rest of it. So she pretty much does a little hook, breaks it, and then what they do is they attach a probe to his head. He's right here. They do that because after the water has been broken, it's a lot harder to measure baby's heartbeat past that. So they have the contraction monitor on you, and then they have the probe up there to measure baby's heartbeat. So they do all that because also baby's going to be moving, and so then the monitor gets, yeah. So by that time, it was like 8:30, and the contractions were hard, and they were very often, and they were super strong, and like how my brain works is when pain happens, like the second pain happens, I hold my breath, then I realize I can't hold my breath, and then I start breathing, and so then that's what I kept doing, which was making the contractions worse. And I will say on Pitocin, I do believe your contractions are a lot harder, but I'd had pretty hard contractions before, so I don't think they make contractions harder. They just bring those other like really, really strong contractions into play. So at this point, my water's been broken. It's just Ethan and I in the room. My family was in there beforehand, everybody pretty much, and they're like, do you want an epidural? And this is when like contractions were hard, and you could see them measuring like, you're fine, and then you're like, and I said yes. I didn't even think about it. I said yes, I want an epidural. So they get the epidural ordered. They come in, put the epidural in. I had what they consider an epidural catheter, which is pretty much a steady stream of the meds into your back. I had no problems with my epidural being put in. My anesthesiologist was great. My nurse was great. Ethan was great with all of that. Because with an epidural, the numbing meds sting. And it's not like I would move, because I know if I move, I could die. And I'm pretty sure the nurse, she deals with this every day. But your body flinches. So then Ethan is holding onto my legs as I'm sitting on the edge of the bed, and the nurse is holding onto my shoulders. A contraction comes, they wait for the contraction to end, and then that's when they do everything. And they said, my anesthesiologist was pretty much in and out within a minute, which helps because then the next contraction comes. So I ended up getting that. It was great. It ended up working great. It actually ended up working too well. So about 30 minutes later, I couldn't feel anything. Like, I couldn't feel the bottom of my lungs, but I knew they were moving because I could feel the top of my lungs. So that was probably about 11. And for the next 30 minutes, my nurse and I, who, God bless her soul, she saved me from having a C-section, you guys, and she knew her shit. For the next 30 minutes, we ended up, like, so at about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good time. About 11:30, we decided that my epidural was like too strong. So we have to call back the anesthesiologist, and she comes in the room, and of course that takes a while. As we're doing that, we are getting constant contractions. Of course, I can't feel them, and my nurse is wanting me to push, so she's having to tell me when to push. So I'm pushing, but I don't know where. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of everything. It's messy. Believe me, there's a lot of everything happening, and I don't know where to push because I can't feel anything. Like, the epidural is too strong. And what my nurse is having to do is, because his head was so big, yes, he has a big head. It's at this, I think they said 88th percentile last time. Yeah, he's had a huge head. That she would have to form him to my birth canal. And that's when babies get cone heads. He had a really bad cone head. So she's trying to get me to push, and I was like, I eventually told her, I was like, I can't push. Like, I can't feel anything. So she calls in the anesthesiologist. The anesthesiologist does not want to turn down the epidural. So the anesthesiologist leaves, and that's about noon-ish. And she says, we're going to break some rules, which I love her to death. And she turns off the epidural. So the epidural turns off. About 15 minutes later, I start to be able to feel my legs. So I'm like, okay, I know what I'm doing. And that's when I could tell a difference, she could tell a difference, and Ethan could tell a difference of pushing. I knew where to push. I could still feel the contractions a tiny bit, which it was just enough to be able to feel them to push. And I feel like maybe if I didn't have as strong as an epidural, I would have given birth a lot sooner. But, oh well. So, about 12:45 happens, and we had been pushing, and she had been forming his head. So pretty much at one contraction, she sticks her hand up there. This is probably TMI, but if you're about to give birth, this is going to happen. Sticks her hand up there and kind of moves him to one side, and the next one she moves him to the other, because he was also getting stuck on my pelvis, which he had a huge bruise on his head from back and forth on the pelvis. So we'd been working on that, and about 12:45, I am dilated to a 10. He is crowning, which Ethan saw when he was crowning. She's like, I can see his head. It was so weird. And so then about 12:45 is when my OB comes in. He had been in and out a couple times since then, checking on me. I can't remember what I was going to say. Oh yeah, 12:45. So he comes in. I am all ready to go. My nurse kicks the epidural back on, and essentially within the next 15 minutes, he was born. I remember, so I could feel everything pretty much at that point because the epidural had wore off. I felt his head pop out. I did tear, and I felt that, and that was the most painful thing. I almost cried. Like, I remember tearing, and I almost cried, and I said, Ethan, I can't do this anymore. Like, and he's like, you can do it. You're right there. So, then, of course, the next contraction comes, and, are you snoring? Yes. And, I was like, okay, I have to mentally think. I'm, of course, going to be, like, I'm mentally thinking, I'm going to be in pain anyways. So if I push with all of my might, I can probably get him out. So after I tore, I did one more big thing, and you feel his head pop out. You're like, and it's like a, and I'm like, okay, and I mentally think, I have one more push if I do this good. If I do this well, I have one more push. And so then one more push later, and I end up giving birth at 1:03 p.m. On October 14th. He ended up weighing 8 pounds exactly, and he was 20 and I believe a quarter. Were you 20 and a quarter? Yeah, 20 and a quarter inches long. So he ended up being a good sized baby. So I did end up tearing. So of course, how they do it there is, they kind of hold him upside down by his leg, and they get kind of some of the junk out. They let Ethan cut the cord, and then they hand him to me. And so then they hand him to me, and he's not crying. So I'm like, why is he not crying? And so then the nurse, which my OB at that point already has his mind on other things, the nurse is kind of like, they're trying to keep my mind away from what's happening down there because we're not really done. She kind of shakes him, and then he goes, this little tiny cry, and so then he starts crying more, and so then that's when I start crying, of course. And so then they give him to me and all that, and as they're doing that, they massage your stomach to get out the placenta, and they have a little pail for it. It's a little white pail that it pretty much goes into for human waste. But after that, they end up weighing him and all that other stuff, and then I ended up having to get stitches for my tear, and yeah, so pretty much from giving birth and getting up to my post room was about 2 hours. Because he was cold, and since he wasn't, and he was breathing very heavily, which they were talking about, he could have gotten some fluid in his lungs or something else, but he ended up going up to the room after a little bit of time under the heater, and because of how my OB did it, or how my nurse did the epidural, is she had turned it on or did like a shot of epidural right at the perfect time to where I didn't feel the stitches, but I felt the labor. And then, of course, you know, they turned it off. And so then by the time the 2 hours had happened and I was up in my room, I could actually walk. I felt everything. And I felt great. I felt amazing. The pelvic pressure was gone. I deal with pain very, very well. But when it's something that's constant and does not go away, I'm like, okay, something's wrong. Obviously, his big head was there sitting on a nerve somewhere, and just was awful. But yeah, so my nurse, because of how she did the epidural and like forming his head down the birth canal, she saved me from having a C-section. I'm pretty sure if I would have waited until the 27th to give birth at the other hospital, I would have had to have a C-section. He would have been a 10-pound baby with a huge ass head. So yeah, but that's actually all I have for you. My labor went very, very well. I ended up delivering in 5 hours, which I've read stories of people being in labor for like 48 hours, and I could only imagine. I was mentally and physically exhausted from that whole thing. But they'd also said I'd probably been in labor the 2 days before that, and I had done the hard part, which was getting up to your water breaking at home. So, okay, I was in labor for, you know, but I was able to do what I wanted to do. I could sit in the bathtub all day if I wanted to. So I suggest, if you are about to give birth, try to do as much at home as possible. It makes a huge difference. And not having to be tied down to a bed, tied down to an IV. Try not to do that, because, I mean, it's a lot mentally and physically. We started the Hunger Games series on TV at 8 o'clock, and we beat the end of it. So, that's all I'm saying for that. But yeah. So, thank you guys so much for watching. If you guys like these kinds of videos, make sure to hit that like button. And leave a comment down below on what exactly happened during your labor experience. Because everybody else is different. And I know I had a great OB during my entire pregnancy. And I had a great labor and delivery nurse. And it was amazing. I would do it again in a heartbeat. But yeah, so, hey, you're okay. Just relax. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.